wife,
Air Force veteran,
gun rights advocate.
This is Stacy on the Right. Here's your host, Stacy Washington.
Welcome to Hour 2. Thank you for being with us tonight on SiriusXM's Patriot Channel. Welcoming into the program, Demian Brady, Vice President of Research at the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good evening, Stacy. Thanks for having me back on tonight.
It's good to have you back. You have an article over at Washington Examiner talking about a looming tax nightmare. I feel like there are a few nightmares we need to deal with. What are you writing about there?
Yeah, that's right. So, a lot of people know that Congress is trying to grapple with how to make sure that the tax cuts enacted in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act don't expire after next year. But, before then, Congress has to get ahead of this, what's known as the 1099-K issue. It's going to be a massive headache for millions and millions of Americans across the country who are not going to be familiar with this law. So, what happened was back in 2021, Congress passed a law signed by President Biden that drastically lowered the threshold for reporting what's known as a 1099-K tax form. This is a form that tracks all transactions from platforms like eBay, Venmo, PayPal, and Apple Pay. So it impacts people who are involved in the gig economy or just selling things online. And so previously, you only had to worry about a 1099-K form if you had a total of 200 transactions and the total amount was over $20,000. But this new law that they passed drops the threshold to just $600, no matter how many transactions. So it's going to cause a lot of confusion for tens of millions of taxpayers who don't know that a lot of the information that's going to be recorded on the 1099-K form that they get, and the IRS also gets a copy, a lot of these aren't going to be taxable. So, for example, if you're out to dinner and you split dinner with friends and family to carve up the bill, that's not going to be taxable. Or if you're collecting rent from roommates through one of these apps, all this is going to show up on a 1099-K form, even though that's not income. Other examples, too, if you like a student just selling used textbooks on eBay, that will easily surpass the threshold and show up. And that's not going to be taxable if you're selling stuff at a loss. But the problem is people are so afraid of the IRS that they're not going to understand it's not taxable, and they could end up overpaying what they owe in taxes. And that's not fair. And the burden is going to be really bad, especially for lower and hardworking and middle-income Americans. So a good thing, though, Congress is working on reform for this that would repeal this crazy threshold and go back to what was in place before.
So 2 questions. Number one, if you're using a tax preparer, if you take all of your receipts and your documents and everything and you drop it off at a CPA's office or something like that, they're going to be able to decipher whatever this is if it's not fixed by tax time.
Well, not necessarily. Because, for example, if you're selling a bike that you got years and years ago, you're going to be selling that online. You're going to have to be able to document that it's not taxable. So that's a lot of research to go back and see what you paid for it and what exactly is going to be taxable or what isn't taxable. So, basically, if this is allowed to go into place, Americans are going to have to live their basic life and treat all personal transactions as if you're running a business to document. I don't know how many times people use Venmo throughout the year. It really adds up, and you have to document all these things needlessly under this new threshold that Congress has set.
So that means we'll see more people doing these transactions in cash because that's the only way around it.
That is it. Well, so, as more people become aware of it, so the issue is, so this was supposed to have gone into effect in 2022, but the IRS was hearing from tax practitioners and some taxpayers and a lot of advocacy groups that taxpayers are just not prepared. They're not informed enough to be able to deal with this. And so the IRS has delayed implementing it for 2 years. And the IRS also has a lot of administrative hassles in implementing this. And so they decided it's going to be a big headache for them because they're set to expect to receive 44 million 1099-K forms under this new $600 threshold, and that's 3 times more than what they used to get before. So that's a lot of time for them processing all this information and then dealing with the flood of questions from taxpayers that they're going to get over the taxpayer assistance phone lines, which are already have quite a backlog and the delay in getting through.
And aren't manned. So those numbers aren't manned. There's nobody answering those lines. If you have a question about your taxes, you have to, you basically should send an email and then hope to get something back. There's been a couple times where I've gotten a response back, but I mean, we're talking about over a very long period of time. Most people just don't ask. But what about all of the mistakes that will be made? When people don't know what they're doing, they'll do their best, but there'll be errors. And so the IRS is supposed to catch those errors and either correct them or reach back out to taxpayers, or do they have to reject their returns and tell them where the errors are?
That's the thinking that went into the reason made by the IRS to delay implementing this in the past. And so what they're doing right now is calling this next tax season a transition year. So by the end of this year, they're going to start enforcing the 1099-K law, but they are not going to follow the statutory threshold set by Congress at a reporting threshold of $600. They've decided that they're going to implement this at a rate of $5,000, which would protect a lot of people from this burden, but it raises a lot of questions. We can think of other examples where the IRS has delayed implementing a provision or delayed some requirements, like, for example, just recently with these horrible devastation from the hurricanes. They're going to delay filing requirements for a lot of these people. Or another example is back in 2018 on tax day when the IRS's website crashed, so they delayed filing day because of that. There's examples like that, but I cannot think of another instance where the IRS has decided to implement its own reporting threshold for a tax requirement, either a rate or a threshold or anything like that. So this sets a horrible precedent for tax policy and tax administration, which is why Congress needs to step in and make sure that they rein in the IRS so that they're following the law and also protecting taxpayers from unnecessary burdens.
They should just put it back to what it was. There was no reason to lower it in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So, this was put back in, this was passed as part of one of those big COVID laws, and was going to be a way to potentially pay for the trillions of dollars that were being included in this bill. So the House of Representatives is working on the Saving Gig Economy Taxpayers Act, introduced by Carol Miller, and this would go back to the previous threshold of 200 transactions exceeding $20,000. Now, on the plus side, there is bipartisan interest in reforming this. Democrats now, a lot of Democrats have agreed that the $600 threshold is just too ridiculous and it's unworkable, as we've seen by the IRS delays. So they would set it at $5,000, which is the threshold that the IRS has decided to implement it. But, at least if Congress gets involved, that's providing guidance and clarity to the IRS and to taxpayers to help fix this problem.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think what's interesting about it is, the government overspends. They try to find a way to make the taxpayers cover it. Decisions they've made that are bad, choices they've made that don't make sense. And what they do is they implement something that actually it's unworkable for them. And it's because there are so many people here, and there are so many people who use these online payment systems. And some of it is for business purposes. Some people are buying things at, secondhand shops, thrift stores, estate sales, reselling them online, and they're making a profit on something that they paid $6 for that they're selling for $45. That is happening. But there's a lot more of what you described, where a bunch of people goes out to dinner, and a party, anything over 8 people, they're going to give you a single bill. And there's always somebody in your friend group who is amazing with their calculator on their phone. And they'll say, okay, the total bill is this. There's 14 of us, but, that's really 7 couples. So I'm dividing it by 7. So everybody hand me, and the smart people hand cash over. I've been at dinners like this where my husband and I look at each other and he'll go, do you have cash? And I will miraculously have enough to cover our slice. But everyone who's been coming to the little gathering for years on end, they always have, not only do they have cash, they have exact change. They have ones, so they hand exactly how much they owe over, throw some money on the table for the tip, and they jump up and go get in their car and leave. Most people aren't like that. Most people are she'll say, my Venmo is, I put my Venmo in the group chat. Everyone else is Venmoing her. That's going on a lot. Like, I picked up your kid and she owed the teacher blah, or she didn't have lunch money today, so I paid her, and you're going to Venmo her back, right? You're Venmoing her back for your kid's lunch money. Or, one person's ordering all the T-shirts for the parents for the football. There's so many examples. What I don't understand is why we're stuck in this situation. It's like it's a rule that nincompoops made. It's so idiotic.
Yeah, those are some great examples. You can also think of people who use eBay as just like an ongoing garage sale to help clear clutter from the house and make a little money back. You're not selling things for profit. You're just selling stuff you have around the house for a loss, just to help get some cash to help cover bills. Especially, this is just going to be another burden on top of all the inflationary pressures that consumers and taxpayers are facing today. So, thankfully there is bipartisan interest in fixing this policy, but we just need to make sure that we get in touch with members of Congress so that they, enact this into law rather than letting the IRS set something arbitrarily. That's going to raise a lot of concerns if the IRS is just allowed to rewrite the laws.
Yep, and that, I think, is the worst of it. And all of it's bad, but that's the very worst of it. If you're driving along or if you're wanting to read this story, it's in the show notes at stacyontheright.com, but I'm also putting it in my Twitter feed. It's a great breakdown from Demian. It's Congress must fix this looming tax nightmare over at the Washington Examiner. Thank you so much for coming on tonight from the National Taxpayers Union Foundation.
Thank you much for having me on. And me and my colleagues have been writing a lot about the 1099K issue. You can find out our research at ntu.org.
All right, we will do that. Demian, have a great weekend.